This podcast is on the human immune system, just a real brief overview of some of the major players, and you can put that as the heading in your notebook for this part of your notes. This picture that we're starting with shows a whole bunch of red blood cells with a nice little bacteria cell nestled in there. We're going to be talking a little bit more about bacteria as we go through this slideshow. First of all, what is the immune system? Just a quick overview. This is the body's defense against disease-causing organisms, such as bacteria and other cells. Also defense against cells in the body that aren't working correctly, so our own malfunctioning cells, and any other foreign particles that get into the body, such as those that cause allergies and things like that. In this story about the immune system, we have some villains, the bad guys, the things that get into our bodies that activate the immune system. The first one is bacteria. And we talked a lot about bacteria already. The fact that they are little prokaryotic cells, they don't have a nucleus, they can cause different types of infections and things in our body, and we're pretty familiar with those. The new one that we haven't talked a lot about yet are the viruses. Viruses are, first of all, very, very tiny, small particles. There's debate within the scientific community as whether or not they're living or not. And the reason for this is because all they have in their structure is a protein coat, so like a capsule made out of protein that surrounds a form of nucleic acid. Nucleic acid could be either DNA, which you know a little bit about already, or a relative of DNA called RNA. So some scientists will argue that that viruses are not even living organisms, and some scientists will say they are living organisms. Another reason that some scientists say they're not living organisms is because they can't reproduce on their own. They have to infect another cell and then use the reproductive parts of that cell to actually make new viruses or to make baby viruses. So they're a little bit different organism than a lot of the other ones we've been studying so far. Here's an example of a virus and what you might find. They come in all shapes and sizes. This is just kind of a generalized one, so I wanted to point out to you some of its parts. First of all, the outside here, okay, that we're seeing with all these little bumps on it, and then some of these kind of round shaped structures around here. Okay, all of this is that protein coat. Some viruses do have some lipids, like a lipid bilayer, as part of their coat as well, but it's typically mostly proteins with a little bit of lipids included. And then here in the inside, in the middle, okay, right here, is the DNA or the RNA. We call that the nucleic acid. So as you can see, they're very simple structures that don't really have a lot of the parts that cells have. For example, those ribosomes and mitochondria and chlorophyll and all of those. They are just made of proteins, DNA or RNA, and sometimes some lipids. Alright, so as I mentioned already, when viruses need to reproduce, they need another cell to do that. They can't reproduce on their own. So what they'll do is they'll go into a cell, they'll take over the cell, the organelles and every other part of the cell, and eventually most viruses make that cell burst and releases thousands of new cells. So before an infection, a cell might look like this big gray cell, but after a virus has infected it, you can see all these little dots inside of it. All of these little dots inside the cell represent viruses that the cell is making. Eventually, as I said, the cell will burst open, releasing those viruses so they can go and infect some other cells. Alright, if we're going to have villains in our story, we also need to have some heroes. Now, there are lots of different ways that your body keeps out and kills invading cells, but the one we're going to focus on is the white blood cells, or the WBCs I might refer to throughout the presentation. They will normally be in your blood, right? Your white blood cells will be in your bloodstream mixed in with the red blood cells and some other things. But if a body's tissues are infected, let's say you get an infection in your stomach tissue, they will go from the blood into the tissue to take care of those invaders. One of the parts of the immune system that triggers these white blood cells to do their job is called an antigen. Now, antigens are proteins again, lots of proteins involved in this process, and they are on the surface of all different types of cells, not only good cells or bad cells, they're basically all different types of cells, and they help to identify self cells and invading cells for the body. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about cell structure, that there are some proteins that help to tell your body if those cells belong to you or if they don't. For example, all of your red blood cells have antigens on them that help to identify who they belong to and what they are. So if you have type A blood, for example, okay, you have antigen A protein on the surface of your red blood cells. Okay, that's these little round yellow pushpin things are on that red blood cell. If you have B type blood, you have B type antigen on the surface of your red blood cells. Again, these don't hurt you. These antigens just help your body decide that it belongs to you, if the blood is yours or not. You see how these antigens look different in these pictures? They're the little spiky ones. If you are AB blood, as you may have guessed it, you have both antigen A and antigen B on the surface of your cells. So you can see the little round ones and the little pointy ones. And finally, if you have O blood, you have neither type of antigen. So your cells are empty of those. Now there are other antigens that are on the surface of your blood. For example, you may have heard people say, well, I'm B negative or I'm B positive. That positive and negative refers to a different antigen on your cells. So they're all over your red blood cells and other cells in your body as well. But what we're going to be focusing on is the antigens that are in those invading cells and how they trigger the white blood cells to do what they are supposed to do. So here's an example of what antigens on a virus might look like. Remember a picture of our virus before and had the little knobby things on it? Okay, this virus has all these little things sticking out of the surface of the cell, and you can see they don't all look the same. Okay, the virus doesn't just have one type of antigen on its surface. It has lots of different types of antigens, proteins that it carries around on the outside of its cell that your body will say, that is not something that I recognize, so we're going to send a white blood cell after it. Okay, so those antigens are what triggers that first response from the white blood cells.